What does King Charles do, and how has cancer changed his duties? So I came across this article from the BBC recently, and I thought it would be interesting to dive into and do a bit of an explainer on for you guys. So King Charles, of course, has resumed public duties as he continues to be treated for this undisclosed type of cancer after he temporarily stopped most of his public engagements, or indeed postponed them, and trips and things like that after his diagnosis back in February. And I don't know how it's been that long already, but I'm glad to see that King Charles is indeed back to duties. We know he's a workaholic, so will have wanted to return to his duties and roles as soon as possible. Now, the first part of this article is going straight into the detail. How did his cancer diagnosis change King Charles's duties? He was diagnosed with cancer in February 2024 and began treatment shortly afterwards. Although he withdrew from public events in the weeks after his diagnosis, the king continued with his constitutional role as the head of state. He did not pass it down to William, although he had several key members of the royal family ready to pick up the role of head of state. They are kind of this contingency plan in the background if anything happens to the monarch, but he indeed carried on with his constitutional role as head of state while he was undergoing treatment, including paperwork and private meetings. You know, the king gets these red boxes every single day and opens them into his private office and goes through everything that he needs to do, signing government papers, government bills, giving royal assent, and having private meetings, things like that. So they all continued while the king was undergoing his cancer treatment. His weekly sessions with the Prime Minister, where the Prime Minister comes and meets the king in his private chambers usually, these also carried on, although not all of them took place in person in the private chambers. Some of them were over call or possibly video call. We're not quite sure on the details, but they did all still go ahead. The king was up to date with the Prime Minister, and then his first major public appearance after his diagnosis was on Easter Sunday, when he and Queen Camilla greeted crowds after a church service in Windsor. So what public duties has the king carried out then? So the king resumed his public duties at the end of April 2024, and his first visit was to a cancer treatment centre with Queen Camilla soon after the Easter Sunday event. He also made a surprise visit to an army barracks in Hampshire, where he joked about being allowed out of his cage, and this comes back to the thing about King Charles being a workaholic. He was so eager to get back out there to his duties. He loves being out and about doing stuff. Since then, he has of course attended the Trooping the Colour ceremony, the King's official birthday parade, where Catherine, the Princess of Wales, also made her much anticipated first public appearance after her own cancer diagnosis earlier in the year as well. At the end of June, the King and Queen then hosted the Emperor and the Empress of Japan for a 3-day state visit, which was full of pomp and ceremony, and was amazing to see the King back in action hosting these important state events. A few days later, several members of the royal family, including the King and the Queen, travelled to Edinburgh for the Thistle service, and this was part of Scotland Week or Holyrood Week, and this is where the King officially formally appointed the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Edward, to Scotland's highest order of chivalry, the Order of Thistle. And then the King and Queen then travelled to Cardiff to mark 25 years of the Welsh Parliament, where King Charles, the former Prince of Wales of course, for a long time, addressed members of the Senedd, which is the Welsh Parliament, the Senedd, in Welsh. He addressed them in Welsh, spoke Welsh, it was amazing, and he actually has quite a fluent accent, I've seen comments about it, people saying that he actually speaks Welsh very well. King Charles is of course multilingual, speaks loads of different languages, French, German as well, very fluently, so very impressive that he can also speak Welsh. King Charles and Queen Camilla then visited Jersey and Guernsey, the first time a British monarch has been to the Channel Islands since the late Queen Elizabeth II went to Jersey in 2005. So quite a while since the Channel Islands have hosted the monarch, but the reception there was amazing. It was quite rainy, but everyone was very joyous that the King and Queen had visited. Then lots of royal events and appearances were kind of toned down during the general election campaign, because it is a rule that royal events kind of have to be muted a bit so they do not take attention away from the political events. After the general election, though, the King invited, of course, Sir Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, who won a landslide of victory in the general election. He invited Keir Starmer to Buckingham Palace to invite him to form a government. And then the King delivered the King's Speech on the 17th of July as part of the official state opening of Parliament, this new Parliament with Keir Starmer as Prime Minister. Buckingham Palace has also confirmed that the King and Queen will visit Australia on October. They're going ahead with this planned visit before heading to Samoa for a Commonwealth Summit. However, the couple will not visit New Zealand after the King's doctors advised against an extended visit. Now, I left this bit till a bit later in the video because many of you watching will know what the King does, but if you don't, keep watching now, and this article also goes over the King's functions. The King, of course, is the head of state of the United Kingdom and many other realms and territories around the world and states, but his powers are largely symbolic and ceremonial, and he remains indeed politically neutral. Now, the royals are allowed to vote, but it is kind of this tradition that they do not vote and they stay politically neutral, as of course actually having a neutral head of state is very stabilizing for the country. It gives someone to rally around to in hard times. They're not partisan and don't influence politics, and overall I think constitutional monarchy is a very, very good system. He receives daily dispatches from the government in a red leather box that I mentioned earlier, including briefings ahead of important meetings or documents that need his signature. This is what's called royal assent that I also mentioned briefly earlier. This is kind of a rubber stamp that the King will give to government documents and bills and things like that. In fact, the monarch has not refused giving royal assent to a government bill since 1708, so it is essentially a rubber stamp because the monarch, in their belief, thinks that the government, has been elected by the people. They have a mandate to enact what they had in their manifesto, and the King should not interfere with that process. King Charles also leads the annual remembrance event in November at the Cenotaph in London, as well as hosting visiting heads of state and regularly meeting foreign ambassadors and high commissioners. The King is also the head of the Commonwealth, an association of 56 independent countries, many parts of the former British Empire, spanning 2.5 billion people. He is head of state of 14 of these countries, known as the Commonwealth Realms, as well as the Crown Dependencies, which are the Channel Islands of Jersey and Guernsey, and the Isle of Man. King Charles also confers official honours on people from all walks of life in public recognition for their merit, service or bravery. Most of these honours are awarded at New Year and on the monarch's official birthday in June, as well as the King being a patron to a huge number of organisations, including the RNLI, the Lifeboats, the Samaritans, RAF Museum, Yorkshire Agricultural Society, and many, many others. He's patron to a load of different organisations and charities especially. The Queen also holds a number of patronages, including the Royal Literary Fund, the Royal Academy of Dance, the Royal Voluntary Service, and the Army Benevolent Fund, and undertakes her own public engagements as well. I won't go too much into any more detail about other members of the royal family, but that's a really quick rundown of what the King does and some of his roles and ceremonial duties. So I hope you enjoyed this video going over what King Charles has done recently, his duties that he's carried out and how cancer has affected those, and what he's still going ahead in October with his visit to Australia and Samoa. That will be lovely to see him out there as well, taking a foreign trip. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like and subscribe. You can join my membership down below as well for some extra perks. But as always, you watching it just to the end is amazing for me. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you in the next video.